Hello and welcome back to the Injury Report. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. And this injury report is for week 14. And that means if you're listening to it, most likely you are in the playoffs. So, first of all, congratulations. Secondly, though, don't let an injury diminish your chances of moving on to the next round of your fantasy playoffs. Tune in. I've got the injury news for this week for you, and there are some situations that bear monitoring through the weekend and into Sunday, as there are a number of players listed as questionable that look like they're actually 50-50 calls or possibly even game time decisions. So without further ado, let's look at the quarterbacks. Matt Schaub is listed as questionable, but he has not practiced yet this week, and it looks like all signs are pointing towards Jimmy Clausen getting the start. Clausen has actually already faced the Seahawks once this year, earlier in the season with the Bears. He was waived. The Ravens added him, and he did not have much success earlier in the season against the Seahawks. Wouldn't expect him to have any success this go-around against the Seahawks. And the biggest piece of fantasy news out of this, because the Seahawks were a must-start anyway, and you weren't starting Matt Schaub, but is that if Matt Schaub is forced to miss a contest, probably hurts Buck Allen's case a little bit. Not necessarily for usage. He's going to get enough volume that he is still a low-end RB2 flex play at worst. But in shallower leagues, if you do have some depth at running back, might be worth considering sitting him. Jimmy Clausen really didn't use his backs much in the first game against the Seahawks, and we know that Matt Schaub definitely had an eye for Buck Allen. Threw to him 13 times last week, and Allen caught 12 passes. So without Schaub under center, does look like it could hurt Buck Allen's value this week. Next up at quarterback is a guy who's already ruled out, expected to be out anyway. That's Andrew Luck. But Colts owner Jim Irsay has indicated that he expects Luck to play next week, and at worst, play in Week 16. Now, if he doesn't play until Week 16, tough to trust him in your fantasy championship after this long of a layoff, but worth a grab now if he was cut and you're maybe rotating through quarterback streaming, or you just have a below average starting quarterback and have managed to get this far riding your running backs and receivers and tight end or whatever. Luck's worth a grab and stash, because if he plays next week and balls out, he has a really good matchup against the Dolphins in Week 16. So if he comes back next week and looks really good, while it's not an ideal situation to grab a guy who's played just one game over the last handful of weeks and probably will have some rust to shake off, if you're struggling at quarterback anyway, at least Luck has a high ceiling if you were to grab him, stash him, and things were to break just right. Finally, at quarterback, Case Keenum is listed as probable, been named the starter already. His health, from a health perspective, that's great news. Certainly like to see Keenum healthy after that scary concussion suffered a few weeks ago. But from a fantasy perspective, doesn't really matter. He's below average quarterback at the NFL level. Not going to be much of an improvement for the passing game. You're not looking to use any of the pass catchers there. Yeah, Tavon Austin flashed a little bit earlier in the season, but you're not using him at this point. And really the only usable player for the Rams at this point is Todd Gurley, and it's a really tough matchup for him, but just given the likelihood of him getting a fair volume of work, you're almost forced to use him in a below average matchup. I know I'm using him in a 12-team league that starts two running backs. Just not enough options at running back really to look elsewhere. But Case Keenum's return really doesn't do much from a fantasy perspective, but still wanted to point him out since that's good news for him. And I think anybody that saw that hit was kind of left shaking their head and maybe had a bad feeling like I did in the pit of my stomach, because that was just a terrifying hit. Moving on to running back, Carlos Williams has been ruled out for this week with a shoulder injury. I mean, LaShawn McCoy's been on fire lately anyway. He's arguably the top fantasy running back this week. And even if Williams were playing, that certainly wouldn't be different. But with Williams out, definitely diminishes the likelihood of a goal line touch being vultured from McCoy, of any work being poached from him. So expect McCoy to get the ball as much as he can handle it. And next up is another running back situation where C.J. Anderson is listed as questionable with an ankle injury, and Ronnie Hillman is listed as questionable with a foot injury. But not all questionable designations are created equal. C.J. Anderson hasn't practiced this week. Gary Kubiak's indicated that he's still really sore, and while he said that he could still play this week, I wouldn't hold my breath. Ronnie Hillman, conversely, practiced on Friday, looks closer to probable than doubtful, and he is going to be the starting back. If C.J. Anderson sits out, Juwan Thompson might get some work as a relief option for Ronnie Hillman, but Hillman would bump up to RB2 status from flex status in a nice matchup with the Raiders. Surprise on this week's injury report, or maybe not on the injury report itself, but surprised that an injury cropped up or was noted this week was with Mark Ingram. Shoulder injury was discussed a few days ago, and serious enough that it's put Mark Ingram on the IR. He's out for the remainder of the season. Big blow to those who had him and rode him this season. In his absence, C.J. Spiller and Tim Hightower look to be deployed as a running back by committee situation. Of the two, Spiller's a more explosive back. Hightower's been out of football prior to this year for a few years. So Spiller, the better of the two, especially in PPR leagues, but he's a little more than an emergency option. Worth a grab now, especially if you're hurting at running back, to see what he does, see how the workload is split up. If Spiller does go out there and play well, rip off a few big plays, maybe he tips the scales in his favor. But Ingram out, and that certainly hurts the backfield for his owners. Another crowded backfield is that in with the Eagles, and this one's fully healthy though, instead of the injured and fishing through the wreckage for fantasy value. But in Philadelphia, Ryan Matthews is listed as probable, will return from a concussion this week. And while DeMarco Murray's salty and complaining about his playing time, don't expect for that to increase this week, even with his complaints. Matthews has been the better back in that backfield this year, and Murray's usage was limited with Kenyon Barner and Darren Sproles in the backfield. So Ryan Matthews' return could really put a cap on Murray's usage this week. And I had already suggested gluing him to your benches in the Sit 'em Start 'em podcast and article. That is just furthered with Ryan Matthews lining up to play this game. And then finally, at running back, Carlos Hyde's out again. I mean, no new news here. Unlikely to play the rest of the year, it looks like. Why they haven't put him on IR, I'm not sure. I guess they're holding out hope that maybe he'll get some more reps this year. Seems silly to try and push him at all to get back. Just shut him down, let him recoup, and move on to next year. But with him out, Sean Drone's an RB2 against a really bad Browns run defense that's allowed the second most rushing yards per game to running backs, and Drone can do some damage in the passing game as well. Moving on to receivers and tight ends, Crockett Gilmore is questionable. Didn't practice on Thursday. Looks like a long shot to play. Whether Schaub or Clausen's playing quarterback, it doesn't matter. Matchup looks good against the Seahawks, but neither quarterback's good enough to exploit that matchup with Gilmore. So even if he suits up, not an option to start this week, and looks like he's a long shot to play anyway. Speaking of tight ends, Martellus Bennett is ruled out and on IR. Marcus Wilson is out with a foot injury. Zach Miller is listed as questionable, and Eddie Royal is listed as questionable. Miller played with his rib injury last week, should play again this week. Decent DFS option, but not a guy that I would start in season-long leagues. Eddie Royal looks like he's a true 50-50 possibility to play this week, but he's not a guy that you're going to be looking to start in fantasy leagues right now, especially after a lengthy layoff with some rust to shake off. But Alshon Jeffrey really is the only season-long option that you're looking to start in that passing attack. And another tight end, Tyler Eifert of the Bengals, listed as probable with his neck injury, and he's expected to play this week. He is a tight end that needs to be started. I mean, that goes without saying. He leads the league in touchdown receptions, but this week he's going to have a chance to be one of the highest scoring tight ends with his great matchup against the Steelers. Steelers have struggled with tight ends. Eifert held Eifert in check the first time these two teams met. Not the Steelers, dropped a couple balls, cost himself big time, but looks like one of the best options at tight end, especially this week. I mean, he's been a tight end one all year, but he has a chance to rival Greg Olsen and maybe some others for that top tight end scoring throne this week. Next up is the other team from Ohio, Cleveland, and Gary Barnidge listed as questionable with an ankle injury. Brian Hartline listed as questionable with a hip injury. Travis Benjamin listed as questionable with a shoulder injury. But in this case, all of the questionable designations are equal. all are probably closer to probable. All three are expected to play. Johnny Manziel's back under center, which is an upgrade, remarkably, from Austin Davis. Usually you don't think of Johnny Manziel starting as an upgrade anywhere, but Austin Davis, really a okay-ish backup if you need him in emergencies, but Manziel's ability to shed some tackles and keep some plays alive with his legs certainly helps the value of a guy like Travis Benjamin, who can get behind defenses. Gary Barnidge has been a tight end one all year. Did do his best work with Josh McCown this year, but he's a starter at this point. He's played well enough that he's almost quarterback proof for starting. You have to get him out there anyway. Brian Hartline's played well of late, especially by Brian Hartline standards, but I still have him behind Benjamin in that receiving pecking order for the Browns, assuming everybody's healthy. And I can't advocate starting Hartline even in a decent matchup against the 49ers, unless you're in like a 14-team league where you're starting three receivers in a flex, in which case Hartline, guess you could say he's in play, but not a guy that I'd be looking to get out there in standard size leagues. Calvin Johnson of the Lions is listed as questionable with an ankle injury, but he's had that ankle injury since week 8. He's been had his workload reduced in practice throughout that since suffering that injury. Doesn't appear to be in any imminent danger of missing the game. Is listed as questionable though, so always worth throwing him in this article just to make sure that you're keeping tabs on him in case he does suffer a setback. Who knows, trips over an animal in his household, does something to aggravate the ankle injury. Obviously, if that's the case, maybe he'll miss a contest, but all things considered, he hasn't missed a contest with this ankle injury yet, so I wouldn't expect this to be one that he misses. Allen Hurns is listed as probable with a thigh injury, but it's not a thigh injury that sidelined him last week. Concussion sidelined him. He's going to be back this week, and he has a great matchup against the Colts. He's a low-end wide receiver 2 or a high-end wide receiver 3. Get him in your lineups. And next up at receiver, we've got a couple who are listed as questionable for the Dolphins. Rashard Matthews with a rib injury. Kenny Stills with an ankle injury. Kenny Stills looks 50-50. Rashard Matthews hasn't practiced this week, says he wants to play in the Monday Night Football contest. I wouldn't bank on that. Sounds like he's more doubtful than probable. And if he's out, Devontae Parker looks like a nice play as a flex against a really bad Giants secondary. And Jarvis Landry, always in play. Unless you're in the absolute shallowest of leagues, he's pretty much a must-start at this point. He's the favorite target of Ryan Tannehill, and this matchup with the Giants is just perfect. And the Patriots are no strangers to having multiple players listed on the injury report, but news actually good here for once for them. Rob Gronkowski returned to practice in a limited capacity, practiced on Thursday and Friday. His knee injury has him listed as questionable. Looks like he's shaping up to be a game-time decision. Scott Chandler's on the injury report with a knee injury as well. He's listed as questionable, partial practice participant this week, but he doesn't look like he's in any danger of missing the game. If you have Rob Gronkowski and you have Scott Chandler as well, you can leave Gronk in your lineup, switch in Chandler last minute if Gronk is inactive. If you don't have Chandler on your Gronk team, there really aren't tight end options in the Monday Night Football game or opposing Gronk in that Sunday Night Football game. So unless you've got maybe a 4 o'clock tight end that you can wait until pretty close to the last minute to get in, keep Gronk on your benches. It stinks to do, especially if he ends up playing. But if he's going to be a game-time decision, eating a 0 at tight end is not worth taking that chance when you could get some. I mean, there's no such thing as guaranteed points at the position, but when you're guaranteed a 0 or could get a 0 if he sits out, or would get a 0 if he sits out, not worth taking that chance. But the other news from the Patriots is that Julian Edelman returned to practice in a limited capacity on Wednesday. And while he's already been ruled out for this week, doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be ruled out for next week. So if he was cut in your fantasy leagues, go ahead and go scoop him up. Monitor his practice schedule the next week, see how he does, see what the indications are for his availability in week 15 or week 16. And I mean, at this point, a lot of gamers did cut him to the wire. I certainly would have if I had owned him, because all the reports basically indicated that he was going to be out for the rest of the regular season. So get on your waiver wire, see if he's available. Obviously, if he's back, I wouldn't think he'd need much time to shake off the rust and have value catching passes from Tom Brady. Then the Saints, they've got a couple receivers listed on the injury report. Brandon Cooks reportedly suffered a concussion during practice in the middle of the week. But those reports turned out to be untrue, apparently. Was dizzy, passed through the NFL's concussion protocol just for precautionary measures, and he's listed as probable for this week. Willie Snead also listed as probable with a calf injury, missed last week's game. With Mark Ingram out, you'd expect Brandon Cooks' value to go up a bit, as they're likely to lean on the short passing game to kind of supplement, basically act as a faux rushing attack instead of leaning on that running game where Ingram would pick up some hard yards, maybe dump it off to Brandon Cooks a little bit in the short passing game, or just air it out more in general, which would help the value of both receivers. Snead goes from a non-option to a fringe flex option in 12-team leagues or larger, where Cooks remains a good start, especially in PPR leagues. Amari Cooper of the Raiders was listed on the injury report as probable with a foot injury. Kind of surprising. He ended up on the injury report. Really didn't have any injury headed into the week, so not sure when this foot injury cropped up. Not a good matchup for him this week against the Broncos. Bumps him down from strong wide receiver 2 to more of a wide receiver 3 or flex option in standard size leagues. But if you're one of those gamers who it was hit by the deck, basically, to take a poker term, and nailed your receiver picks, and maybe you got guys like Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns and DeAndre Hopkins, and Amari Cooper is a bit of a luxury play. Maybe you've got Martavis Bryant on your roster as well. It's not crazy to sit him against the Broncos secondary that's just been suffocating to opposing wide receivers this year. Only defense in football that's allowing fewer than 200 yards passing per game to quarterbacks. So if you have really good options at receiver, even if you have a receiver that's maybe not quite as good as Cooper but has a better matchup, Hurns again comes to mind. Go ahead and sit Cooper this week. If you are in a 12-team league and it's more of a balanced offense and your bench options really aren't anything flashy, I would keep Cooper in there. And then the Chargers, division rival of the Raiders, the news is not good for them. Stevie Johnson ruled out. Dontrell Inman ruled out. Keenan Allen's already been out. Phillip Rivers has no one to throw to at receiver anymore. Malcolm Floyd missed some time with a labrum injury. I don't want to call him a ticking time bomb, but with that type of serious injury and having not undergone surgery, it's not unquestionable he's going to aggravate that. He's got his tight ends, Ladarius Green and Antonio Gates. But if you're thinking of starting Phillip Rivers against the Chiefs, I think you're foolish. And at this point, with basically no healthy receivers to throw to, I don't have a problem with cutting Phillip Rivers to the waiver wire and just streaming that position the rest of the year. Finally, Kendall Wright of the Titans has been ruled out with a rib injury. And with Darrelle Revis likely back this week, that means that fresh off of his 100-plus yard receiving game, the first of his young career, Dorial Green-Beckham probably going to see himself some Darrelle Revis, and that pretty much kills any intrigue that I had of considering him as a flex option or considering him in daily leagues. Still a big target, could be a red zone threat, but with Kendall Wright out, eliminates one weapon for Marcus Mariota to move the ball down the field with, so maybe they're not even in the red zone as often as they would otherwise be. But it also removes a receiver for Darrelle Revis to cover from the equation. So really bad matchup for DGB if that turns out to be the case. And Wright, obviously, as he's out, at this point, I think it's safe to cut him. He hasn't really done much this year. And if he's playing at less than 100% the next couple weeks, I can't see trusting him over any even fringe receivers with a decent matchup the rest of the way. So that's going to wrap things up. Good luck this week. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for our articles, podcasts, and active forum that are ready to help you win your playoff matchups and ultimately win your league. Good luck, and see you next week.